I usually just say, is everyone happy for signing the minutes? Okay. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here to the Society of Antiquaries this evening and to welcome our new Honorary Secretary, Dr. Rachel Swallow, who's going to read the notices of the last AGM.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome, and it's lovely to meet everyone tonight. So, the minutes of the annual general meeting of the Royal Archaeological Institute on Wednesday, the 14th of May, 2025. The annual general meeting of the Institute was held on Wednesday, the 14th of May, 2025 at 4:45 p.m. in the rooms of the Society of Antiquaries and online. The President, Ms. Nathalie Cohen, was in the chair. The minutes of the May 2024 annual general meeting were read, agreed by the membership and signed as a correct record. The Honorary Secretary, Mr. Brian Kerr, was retiring. Council had identified a possible successor, and Council hoped to announce his successor soon. There were no retiring members of Council. To bring Council to the correct number of 12, Council recommended the appointment of Mr. David Barker and Professor Howard Williams. The AGM agreed the appointments proposed by Council. Due to unforeseen issues with the print and distribution of the spring mailing, members had been sent the Council report and financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2024 by email in advance of the meeting, and these were put to the meeting. Vice President Mr. Stephen Sherlock was unintentionally omitted on page 11 of the report. The Institute's accountants, Sotheby's, would be notified and advice would be sought to rectify the matter. The Council report and financial statements were approved and agreed by the membership. Council recommended that Messrs. Sotheby's be reappointed as the Institute's auditors until the annual general meeting in 2026. This appointment was agreed by the membership. The President thanked the retiring Honorary Secretary for his services, support and guidance over the past 4 years. The President reiterated her apologies for the missing mailing and informed the members that the Institute would be looking for a new printer and distributor. There was no further business and the meeting adjourned at 5 o'clock. Now, if nobody's got any comments, amendments or additions, is everybody happy for me to sign that as a true and fair copy of the meeting of the AGM last year? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So just before we start this evening's presentation, it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you all Jason Cohen, who is the winner of our Master's Dissertation Prize for this year. So I'd just like to invite Jason to come up, and he's going to say a few words about his research topic. And we also have a card for you.
Thank you.
I'll give you that, and I'll give you that.
Thank you very
And then
much.
I'll shake your hand.
Appreciate
Congratulations.
it. Thank you very much. Well, I know you must be thinking this is a terrible example of nepotism, but I actually have never met Nathalie, so no relation other than being part of the same general conspiracy. In any event, I can't tell you how much this means to me. When I turned 40, I was living in Hong Kong as a business consultant, and I noticed a lot of my friends were buying sports cars, and I decided to move to England to become an archaeologist. So this is the culmination of my work. I worked on that's what I'm working on now. I worked on weapons burials in the early medieval period. Now that we have the advantage of having ancient DNA and something called isotopic analysis, which talks about where people were raised. And this is a subject that had been tread over many times. And like many things, there was a traditional narrative, then there was a movement that said it was all wrong. And sort of what I found is, I think, the age that we're in, which is, well, it wasn't all wrong, but it's a little bit complicated. So I found a lot of the complications with these weapon burials. The story's not what we all necessarily believed. It seems like there was an integration culturally in the early medieval period, between incoming Germanic peoples and the native Britons. And that's what I'm continuing to work on now with the benefit of ancient DNA. I did this at Cambridge, at UCL. I'm at Cambridge now. So I did this at UCL with the help of Andrew Reynolds. Stuart Brooks, who's in attendance, is the one who first got me super interested in the early medieval period. And I'm continuing this research now at Cambridge, which is where I'm getting my PhD. So thank you very much for this honor, and it's wonderful to be among you. Thank you.
Okay, so to continue this family affair this evening, it is a real pleasure to be standing here this evening to present my second presidential lecture, and even more of a pleasure that many thanks to the Society of Antiquaries. Caroline? We didn't have any. Where's Sharon gone? We didn't have any papers for this year's AGM. For this year? Apologies. Just before we do the agenda for this year's AGM, to release Claude, who is patiently waiting, I wanted to say thank you very much to the Society of Antiquaries and to the collections team for allowing the presentation of the artefact that I'm going to be talking about this evening to you all this evening, because it's really exciting to actually see the real thing. So I'd like a round of applause for the lamp of knowledge, please, and for Claude. And also so Claude can take it and put it back carefully where it's meant to be. Thank you very much. Hope everyone had a chance to have a look. Sharon, we're just going to run through the agenda for this evening's meeting. So we have had a council meeting this afternoon. The annual general meeting, only members are able to vote. The agenda for this evening is to confirm the minutes of the last AGM held on the 14th of May 2025, which we have now undertaken. To elect the following, the retiring vice presidents are Miss Catherine Stubbs and Mr. Headley Swain. Council recommends that Mrs. Sue Shaw and Dr. Giles Clark be elected as vice presidents. Is everyone, do we have a nomination seconder for that? Do we do that? Thank you, Caroline. The retiring members of council are Professor Penny Bickle, Dr. Christopher Ferguson, Dr. Richard Neville, and Dr. Isabel Thompson. Council recommends that the following be appointed in their place: Dr. Rhiannon Comeau, Dr. Tudor Davis, Miss Lena Delaney, and Mr. Yannick Singer. Do we have approval from members for these appointments? Thank you, Sue. I would like to note at this point our grateful thanks to those vice presidents and retiring members of council for their amazing terms of service. We give notice here that we have appointed Dr. Rachel Swallow as our new honorary secretary. Our retiring editor is Professor Rhiannon Stevens, and council has appointed now Dr. Tansy Branscombe as our new editor for the Archaeological Journal. The item number 3 on the agenda, the annual report and accounts, to adopt the report of the council and financial statements for the year ended 31st of December 2025. Are we happy to confirm that? Yes, excellent, thank you. Item number 4 on the agenda, the appointment of auditors. Council recommends that Messrs Summersby be appointed as the Institute auditors until the AGM, annual general meeting, in 2027. Is everyone content with that decision? Excellent. And I've jumped the gun and presented the Master Dissertation Prize winner already because it's so exciting. Congratulations again, Jason. So 5 p.m, the lecture at the AGM on 13th of May 2026 will be given by the President, that's me, Ms. Nathalie Cohen, on the lamp of knowledge, the symbol of the Society of Antiquaries. So have I concluded all the business? I will get the hang of this eventually. Okay, so this evening I'm going to be talking about the artefact that we've all been lucky enough to see in the real thing, which is the Lamp of Knowledge, which is, frankly, an iconic artefact for the Society of Antiquaries. And hopefully everyone has noticed, as they came through the entrance hall, that you were walking on this wonderful sort of representation of the Lamp of Knowledge in the entrance hall. So this sort of piece of research, I should just sort of make clear at the beginning, I'm not an object historian. I have no particular expertise in archaeometallurgy or anything like that. And this research sprang out of a COVID project when I was furloughed from work and I was looking around for things to do. And I read some really interesting papers about this artefact and took it away and did some research on it. So the Lamp of Knowledge, which you see here, engraved in the 1718, was the very first illustration produced by the Society of Antiquaries as part of the Vestuta Monumenta, so this incredible book of illustrations that sort of highlighted some of the wonders of their collection, and this was the very first one that they chose. It was adopted soon after, by the 1730s, as the Society's symbol of ticket. So it's a really, really early example of visual identity, as we would call it now, or branding, essentially. So it is a very clear brand that was developed in the 18th century, which remains in use today. So you can see the modern logo of the Society of Antiquaries to the left of the image. It continues to inspire, it continues to sort of cast a long shadow across the work of the Society of Antiquaries, including, as recently as 2023, this artwork which hangs in the library upstairs, which is called Illuminating Knowledge, a collaborative screen print reimagining the Lamp of Knowledge, which includes over 200 shapes in the print to represent women associated with the Society from 1870 to 1950. And I thought this made rather a nice link to the lecture I gave last year, which was all about women and the Royal Archaeological Institute. And there will be links to sort of female presence as we go through this evening's talk as well. So those are the sort of the starting points for this talk. And this is the sort of summary of what is known about this artefact, or the stages of identification that it has gone through over the years. So initially, in the 18th century, it is identified as a Roman lamp, so it's a Roman artefact. Subsequently, several hundred years later, in the mid-20th century, it is re-identified as a medieval artefact. And then another 50 or so years later, it is identified as a specifically cultural Jewish item, a Sabbath lamp, in a paper by Emmanuel from 2000. A further association with particular festivals, with Passover in particular, was that link was made by a gentleman called Mr. Roberts, who worked on projects looking at Jewish heritage trails, particularly in Lincoln, and included a project to recreate an example of these kinds of lamps in 2014. So this is the sort of state of knowledge that we have about the lamp. So initially thought to be very, very old, subsequently identified as a later piece, and subsequently to that identified as a specifically Jewish artifact. So there are a number of comparators to this artifact, and one report shown here has a direct link to the Royal Archaeological Institute. So we're looking here at an artifact found during excavations in the 1850s in Lincoln, the report of which was presented And the item itself, I believe, was also presented to a meeting of the Royal Archaeological Institute by Mr. Trollope, rather wonderfully named. And you can see the description here. A bronze lamp with 4 burners intended for suspension, so these are hanging lamps. It was recently found at Lincoln, 9 foot below the surface near the stone bow. Although this curious object has the character of greater antiquity, the lamp has been regarded as of the medieval period. So actually, all the way back in the 1850s, there were these hints that actually these aren't Roman artifacts, these are medieval. However, it presents no feature by which its age may be precisely fixed. And the context of the discovery of this lamp in Lincoln is poorly recorded. It's deeply buried, it's possibly been found in the town ditch, and it is definitely part of a backfill deposit or a dumped deposit of material. A further item was found in Bristol, and this one is probably the most secure, has probably the most secure context of any of the lamps that we're going to look at this evening. This was excavated in the 1970s and came from a demolition deposit associated by the excavator specifically with sort of demolition and evacuation of a house occupied by Jewish occupants. So it is slightly different to the other lamps that we've seen so far. It has just the 3 burners, but it has a relatively secure 13th century date. So this is really the best dated and the artifact with the best context that we have. It appears, though, possibly that it's only ever been published in interim format, even though it was excavated in the 1970s. Then we have other examples which have also been used as comparators to the Society of Antiquaries lamp. And this example is held in the collections of the London Museum and was published recently, 2014, in a paper by Bruce Watson. So you can see the title there, A Medieval Hanging Lamp from St Martin le Grand, London, and its parallels. So Bruce's paper basically examined these other examples, so such as Lincoln, our lamp here, and the example from Bristol, and some examples from European contexts. This lamp is dated on typological grounds to the 12th century, so taking it slightly further back in time. Again, its excavation context is quite uncertain. It was discovered in around 1870 and presented at a meeting of the London and Middlesex Archaeological Society, I believe. There's a very nice watercolour of it. It is interesting to note the condition of this lamp compared to the 2 other examples that we've seen from demolition or backfill deposits, and particularly compared to the condition of the Society of Antiquaries lamp. This has much more of the feel of a curated object, and Bruce's conclusion at the end of his paper actually was that it couldn't be conclusively associated with Jewish religious activity, but that it could equally be a Christian artifact. Far be it from me to disagree with Bruce, but I do disagree, and I think there is strong context for saying that it has its origins as a Jewish artifact. It may have subsequently been repurposed as a Christian artifact. There is a good parallel for the London lamp, which there are only, unfortunately, pictures still surviving. So this is was held in a private collection in Dijon in France, and you can see the caption there does explicitly say that it is a Christian 12th century lamp with biblical scenes. However, we have no knowledge of the current whereabouts of this artifact, no knowledge of the context of its discovery. So while it is a very good and close comparison for the London lamp, we know very much little more. And the final example of one of these more ornate copper alloy hanging lamps comes from Germany, and this is held in the collections at Erfurt Cathedral and probably dates to the early 13th century. There is a second smaller fragment that has also been found and is held at Erfurt. So again, this is currently in a Christian context, but the suggestion is that originally it was a Jewish artifact. And once you start looking, and I'm afraid you're going to see an awful lot of pictures of star-shaped lamps this evening, but that's what this paper is all about. So once you start looking, there are more examples, and they are scattered all over the world. So this example, again dated to the 14th century, is held in the Jewish Museum in New York, but it was originally excavated in Deutz in Germany. This example is held in Saumur in France, again originally dated to the Roman period, I believe, and then redated to the 14th century. Very little context for any of these discoveries. This is a second lamp in Saumur. Very, very similar, as you can see, to our lamp that we have. Possibly the bottom section has been replaced here. This is probably the closest comparable example that we have, both in terms of the date of discovery and also the form in which it takes. So we have a four-spouted lamp with a solid ring hook at the bottom. It has faceted sort of top to the spouted area. This was found in 1707, possibly in Belgium, and is now in the collections of the Museum of Antiquaries in Leiden. So again, the context of excavation, we don't have any understanding of what else might have been around it. It has been dated to the 14th century, but a lot of the dating is simply because this one is dated to the 14th century, so this other one must be 14th century, and so on. This one is from Sweden. This is from Visby. This one is actually dated to the 15th century. Again, very similar to our lamp, but with a slightly different hanging arrangement at the bottom. So at the base of all these lamps, you would have had a drip pan that caught the oil. And this one dated to the 15th to 16th century, again explicitly identified as a Sabbath lamp, which is in Köln in Germany. And then I'm afraid because it was COVID and I was stuck at home, I did a lot of Googling. So then I started looking on the internet, on eBay, on websites, on anything I could find. Where else are these other examples of these lamps? There is a whole lamp museum in Bruges, which I'm disappointed that I've never been to. It's in the same building as the Chocolate and Chip Museum, which I have actually been to. Somehow we skipped the lamp museum. You can see on the left, we have again a very similar example, pretty poorly dated, and two other examples, a single spout and a double spout with a drip pan. There's a wonderful Victorian book on the history of illumination by a gentleman called Monsieur Allemand. He represents these two examples, which he dates to the 14th century. So a six-spouted example and a single-spouted example with its drip pan found from the River Seine, which is impressive that that all remained together. This extraordinary number, which seems to be a composite piece, I think they've dated that one to the 15th century. And then these ones, which for some reason are dated to the 17th century, even though they look almost identical to the ones that have been dated to the 14th century. No context for any of these discoveries. So some of these are examples that have been used as comparators by earlier authors. So the paper by Ian Richmond from 1950, he has looked at the single-spouted examples from Verdun, and again you see a very similar surviving example in the Lamp Museum in Bruges. And as I said, looking on eBay, there are lots and lots of sort of bronze lamps if you wish to purchase one. Very wide dating ranges, very wide geographical origins, so everything from North African to European, and everything in between. These ones were the ones I most recently found, which were on an auction website, a really nice four-spouted example and a single-spouted example with drip pans. So they are not a common artifact, but there are a number of them out there. What is common about all of them is the lack of context that we have for these articles and the lack of research on the actual date of these pieces. Very occasionally, fragments come up in metal detecting, but not in the UK, it would appear, or if they are coming up in the UK, they're not being recognised. So the context of this one, this discovery, which I found on a metal detecting site, is in a forest in France. So that is not very accurate. But the detectorist has gone through the same process as I have and has correctly identified exactly what it is that he is looking at, and has also found a drip pan as well. So there are a number of these drip pans that are showing up on metal detecting forums in Europe. So I had a quick look at sort of the numbers, and there's quite a lot of them. So I thought, well, what's showing up on the portable antiquity scheme by way of lamps, lamp hangers, drip pans? The answer is, as far as I can see, that there are over 200 records for lamp hangers in the portable antiquity scheme, and around 160 of those where they have images are completely different to what we are looking at. So they are tripartite rather than four-pronged. They look nothing like any of the examples that we've seen so far. So it appears that either, again, they are not being recognised in the field, or they are not being recorded. So there is given the amount of detecting that there is going on at the moment, it is an interesting dearth. So just to sort of summarise the most closely comparable examples, it is these 8, really. So the Bristol example of a 13th century date, the Lincoln example, also 13th century. Our lamp here at the Society of Antiquaries, found at St Leonard's Hill in Windsor and currently dated to the 14th century. The example in the museum in Leiden, 14th century Samour, 14th century Samour II, 14th century Visby, 15th. Köln example, 15th to 16th, and then the lamp in the Bruges Museum, date unknown, and the illustration from the 17th century. So we have a date range from 13th to 17th century, with these earlier, more ornate examples from London, from Erfurt, and from France, dated to the 12th century. So when you put that on a map, obviously, it's quite a broad geographic description of a very small number of artefacts. So what we do know is that by the 17th and 18th centuries, these particular kinds of lamps are explicitly identified with Jewish activity, Jewish religious activity in a domestic context. So they are known as sabbath lamps, and by the 17th and 18th, late 17th and 18th century, they are being produced in high status material in places like Germany in particular. So we have these silver Sabbath and festival lamps from Frankfurt on Main on one side in 1680, and then this example on the right that was from an auction relatively recently at Sotheby's, again sort of late 18th century. So these are high status silver representations of what became known as Judenstern, so Jewish star-shaped lamps. And they continue to be represented also in bronze and copper alloy. So again, some examples from Sotheby's from the 18th century, and an example from the Israel Museum in Jerusalem from the 19th century. We can see the use of those lamps and the context in which they're being used in illustrations from the 19th century and going back in time. So you can see suspended over the Passover table in these 19th century illustrations, and also at other festivals, again being lit by these star-shaped lamps with drip pans below. So this is part of Emmanuel's work from 2000, was explicitly identifying the Society of Antiquaries lamp with a Sabbath lamp. So the light that is lit on the eve of the Sabbath. And interestingly, also, this is a very gendered activity. So it is women who are portrayed as lighting these Sabbath lamps. So here we see an 18th century illustration, another 18th century illustration from the National Library of Israel. And this is a bridal chest from the 15th century, again from the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And you can see that, sorry, terribly zoomed in view, but there is a picture of a woman lighting a Sabbath lamp on a bridal chest. So a very close association with the activity of women and the activity of women in the home. So moving further back in time, we also have a wonderful body of illuminated manuscripts to look at and to explore these themes of lighting as a part of Jewish ritual, and also to explore Robert's hypothesis that these are not only used as Sabbath lamps, but they are also used as festival lamps, specifically associated with Pesach or Passover, and depicted in Haggadah. So these are texts that explain the ritual and the symbolism of the Passover sort of activities and the different kinds of foods and so on and so forth. Interestingly, as far as I'm aware, they don't specifically refer to lights or lighting, but a lot of these medieval illuminated manuscripts, so from the 14th and 15th centuries, depict lighting as a part of those cedar tables, as a part of the setup for Passover. It's also interesting to note that these are consistently depicted across both Sephardi and Ashkenazi sort of documentation and illuminated manuscripts, so they are across the diaspora of Jewish activity in Europe. So we're starting here with a view of the Barcelona Haggadah, which is from the 1340s, held in the collections of the British Library. And you can see we have three hanging lamps above the table. Definitely spouted. It's hard to know how many spouts they have. We have this illustration from the Sarajevo Haggadah, mid-14th century, where we have two different kinds of lamps. So we have a star-shaped lamp hanging in the center there, and we also have a glass hanging lamp to the right. It is interesting to note as well that I think this is an exclusively female table that we're looking at here. That was also a Sephardic context, again, Sephardic context from the sister Haggadah, and again the cedar table, and again these depictions of hanging lamps in bronze or gold-coloured metal. As I mentioned, we're not just seeing it in Sephardic illuminated manuscripts, we are also seeing in Ashkenazi illuminated manuscripts. So this from the early 15th century, the Erna Michael Haggadah, and you've got a very prominently displayed star-shaped lamp hanging over the cedar table. This wonderful illustration from the mid-15th century, the Ashkenazi Haggadah, held in the collections again of the British Library, very clearly depicting another star-shaped lamp. And finally, the Yehuda Haggadah from the late 15th century, again, really nice and clear, four-spouted hanging lamp with its drip pan hanging over the cedar table. So there is an incredibly rich source from the 14th and 15th centuries showing these items in their context, in their use. And it is probable that many of the archaeological artifacts have been kind of backdated according to the fact that you can see them in manuscript illustrations of this date, and because the archaeological context for a lot of these discoveries is either unknown or very poorly provenanced. The earliest depiction, however, of a star-shaped lamp in illuminated manuscripts is, I believe, this one. So this is held in the Biblioteca in Milan, I believe, and this shows a star-shaped lamp hanging in a synagogue context. So it is quite likely, if not very likely, that as well as being used in domestic contexts, these bronze lamps are also being used in public or synagogue context. So you can see one on the left of the image there. In some Sephardic tradition as well, so we're looking here at a couple of other illustrations from Haggadah, there is also a tradition of public recitation of those rituals in the synagogue, and you can see that, again, the synagogue, we have these hanging lamps, but they appear to be more of the glass vessel types, and there are lots of them. So this is not, and I'm definitely not an expert in lighting, and this is also probably several PhD projects for someone. really interesting work to be done looking at lighting, which obviously people are doing already, and seeing if we can understand how different ideas are filtering through, what we're seeing in illuminated manuscripts, what we're seeing in the archaeological record, and so on. So there is a well-researched and well-studied group of material that originate in North Africa, these glass hanging vessels, which are in use from the earliest decades of the 13th century to, the middle decades of the 13th century, really, to the early decades of the 16th century. They can be very ornately decorated. They are, again, designed to be hanging lamps, and these seem to be they are widely used in Islamic contexts and in places like mosques, but the shape and the form also seem to be replicated across Jewish tradition and also Christian. So one of the contentions made by Bruce Watson was that the star-shaped lamps could have been Christian because Christians were using metal lamps. Now, they absolutely were in church and cathedral contexts, and they were also using glass vessels, as you can see in this early 13th century illustration. So I thought, I don't want to dwell too deeply on the Islamic sort of connections and context because it's something that I know very little about, but the Christian context for lighting in churches and cathedrals, and also domestic context, I do know a little bit more about. So I thought we'd have a little explore of the theories around whether the star-shaped lamps can be explicitly identified as Jewish or whether they could be Christian as well. So looking at the iconography of the medieval illuminated manuscripts, consistently the lamps that are depicted are not star-shaped lamps. They can be in glass, in this kind of shape that we see here, in a late 12th, early 13th century manuscript showing the martyrdom of Thomas Becket, a popular subject for that period. Again, from this illuminated manuscript from the BNF, we have a hanging sort of, I don't know how you would describe this, funnel-shaped lamp, possibly in metal, possibly in glass. You can see depicted there. We have archaeological examples for lamps in this kind of shape and in a variety of different materials. So in glass, in ceramic, you also get stone cresset lamps. So medieval lighting in Christian contexts and in domestic contexts is relatively well understood, I would have said, as types of material. What we don't see are star-shaped metal lamps. Where we are seeing metal lamps depicted in illuminated manuscripts, they are that kind of shape. They are more sort of tub-shaped, and you can see them here again in the windows of Canterbury Cathedral of sort of early 13th century date. So I think the contention that you can't say that these star-shaped lamps are Jewish artifacts just because Christians were using metal lamps as well is not borne out by the evidence that we can see in the archaeology and in the iconography. It is, what I think, relatively clear that what the kinds of lamps that are being used in Christian contexts are quite differently shaped. Again, a sort of a brief sort of pause to summarise. At present, the Society of Antiquaries lamp is dated to the 14th century through comparison with largely European examples. Unlike all of those other examples, it sits on a base, and it is usually said that the base was added in the 18th century by the antiquaries who were sort of examining this lamp, so either by Stukely or possibly by the finder. Is identified as a Jewish artifact, most likely used in a domestic household context and specifically associated with women. So this brings us to some rather challenging sort of thoughts around that dating, and specifically the 14th century dating of this artifact. So as you may be aware, Jewish communities in England, although they probably existed in the Roman and earlier medieval period. We don't have any archaeological evidence for that as such, but we do know that at the time of the Norman conquest in 1066, there were waves of Jewish immigrants coming to England under the protection of the king at the time, because they were involved in financing and supporting the ambitions of essentially an invading and conquest army. This, I think you can probably characterize as quite a fraught relationship, and within a couple of hundred years, the Jews are being heavily taxed to the point of penury, prior to eventually the Jewish communities being completely expelled from England in 1290 and not welcomed back to England until the time of the Commonwealth. So the late 13th century in England, which is when this illustration dates from, and also these illustrations, is a period of anti-Semitic fervour. You can see that the people in these images are wearing identifying badges. It is a dark time in the history of medieval England. It potentially provides us with some context for the disposal of artefacts like the lamps from Bristol and Lincoln, in that these lamps are being left behind. But it does raise some questions around the 14th century date ascribed to the Society of Antiquaries lamp, because if it is to be associated with being used in a Jewish community in medieval England, it must date to prior to the 14th century, because by 1290, those communities have largely, well, they have ceased to exist. Now, we do know that there was a Jewish community living in Windsor, so we do have context for a Jewish artefact to have been found and used in Windsor. But I would say that potentially we should be looking to ascribe an earlier date to the Society of Antiquaries lamp if we are going to call it a Jewish star-shaped lamp found in England, which is what it is. So 13th rather than 14th century date. So for the sort of final part of this paper, I wanted to look a little bit more at the context of the discovery of this lamp. Quite a difficult and challenging thing for an item that was found in the early 18th century, and again, for which the context is not very secure. So these are the facts as we know them. It was discovered in around 1705 by a gentleman, or well, let's call him just a person at the moment, by Robert Butler, who was at the Hermitage at St Leonard's Hill near Windsor. The item was exhibited at the Society of Antiquaries in 1718, and we do know from the records that were made in the early 18th century that other artefacts were also recorded from this same site at St Leonard's Hill. These included prehistoric items and Roman coins, and Robert Butler bought more of these items to display at the Society of Antiquaries during 1720 to 1725. So the description sounds rather like a hoard of material, which is interesting and difficult to unpick after sort of 400 years or so. We also sort of mentioned earlier the unusual feature of our lamp here that we are looking at, which is that it sits on a base. And it is, as I said earlier, usually ascribed to an 18th century addition, this base. So we do have some early 18th century descriptions and drawings of the lamp, and also of some of the other artifacts that were found with it. So from the History and Antiquities of Berkshire by Elias Ashmole, published in 1723, we read the following. About the year 1705, at St Leonard's Hill, about a mile and a half from Windsor Castle, were found the Roman antiquities of which you have the drafts in the page. So that's his picture. Under a large stone by Mr. Robert Butler, a gardener. So he's digging. In digging, he observed a considerable quantity of ashes, cinders, and etc. upon the brow of the hill, and found also several earthen vessels, entire as well as broke, some of larger and other of smaller dimensions, some of which the gardener conceived to be moulds. At the same place were found many fair, intelligible silver and brass Roman coins. And Ashmole goes on to speculate that what we're looking at is a place of weapons manufactory in the Roman period, nearby to a Roman camp. However, what we're looking at in the image there is not all Roman material. So there are some Roman coins which are drawn by Stukely, which we'll look at in a moment. But a lot of the artifacts that we can see there on the page are not Roman artifacts at all. So certainly two of the top three look like Bronze Age axes of some description. The spearhead, hard to know. I maybe defer to those who are more expert in the room on weapons. We have a depiction of the lamp sitting already on its base by 1723, and then we have a couple of other items which could be candlesticks, potentially. So more items to do with lighting, which is interesting. So these are William Stukely's drawings from 1727-28, again recording the discoveries at St Leonard's Hill. So we have some descriptions of the Roman coinage, we have some sketches of those interspersed with some discoveries from other places. But on the right-hand side of the slide, again, you can see the potential prehistoric, well, they are prehistoric artifacts, a spearhead and our lamp, again, sitting on its nice base there. So the assumption that the base was added by the 18th century antiquarians is a really interesting one, and I don't know where that's come from. And I do wonder, given that they're drawing it with its base already, within decades after its discovery, when that base was added. And this is entirely speculative because we simply can't know. But it is very interesting to think about what that base is. And while scrolling through looking for a bunch of other things as ever, I came across this picture of a 15th century chafing dish, which is held in the collections of the Victorian Albert Museum, which looks an awful lot like the base of our lamp, especially as we have a very damaged sort of bottom section to the lamp. So I do wonder whether what we are looking at is a repurposed bit of a 15th century chafing dish, and I do wonder when the lamp was converted from a hanging lamp into a lamp that sits on a base, because if it is a 15th century chafing dish, then presumably that could have happened at any point between the 15th century and the 18th century when it is drawn as a whole artefact. The reason that I was particularly interested in this paper by Brownsword, looking at the metallurgy of copper alloy objects, is that he was actually able to trace the sort of locales of manufacture of some of these copper alloy artifacts through metallurgical analysis. And I do wonder whether there is a really interesting research project looking at the surviving copper alloy lamps in the various different collections across Europe, and looking at the composition of the metalwork, and seeing if any further sort of conclusions could be made about where the place of manufacture of these items might be, which might also help with dating. So this study actually looked at items dating from the 12th to the 17th century and was able to sort of look at the different kinds of metallurgy and to look at the different locales of manufacture. So potentially really interesting research project for an archaeometallurgist. And I would dearly love to know if indeed the base of the Society of Antiquaries lamp is a chafing dish. So What do we know about St Leonard's, Windsor, and the location of these absolutely sort of fascinating finds? So we know the following, and when I say we know, we don't have archaeological evidence for a lot of these contentions. So the site is believed to have been a hermitage dedicated to St Leonard's, established variously between the 13th to the 14th century, depending on which sources that you read. It is a fairly remote wooded location, but within easy reach of centres of power, places like Windsor Castle. Locally, it is identified, very strongly identified, as the setting of the hermitage visited by Sir Lancelot in Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur. So all of the local sort of historical websites are absolutely convinced that when Thomas Mallory was writing in 1485 about a hermitage in a wooded location on a hill, that he was talking about St Leonard's Hill. So there's this wonderful kind of romantic association. The hermitage continues in use until the dissolution, so that's until the early 16th century, and then it appears to disappear and is represented by a field name, so the Hermit's Croft. But what we do know is that there is a house built on the site not long after, so the hermitage becomes a building, and it is depicted on Norden's map of the forest of around Windsor in 1607. And apologies for the quality of the imagery below, but there is a small actual house drawn at St Leonard's Hill in 1607. So there is a structure on the site, certainly by the early 17th century and probably earlier than that. During the early 18th century, we know that Robert Butler, the finder of these amazing artefacts, was in residence. So whether he's actually in residence or whether he's just gardening there, it would appear that he is in residence and he is able to come to the Society of Antiquaries and present these items. By the early sort of 1730s, the rebuilt hermitage, so this would be the 16th or 17th century house, was apparently recorded as old and falling into disrepair. At that time, it was the Windsor home of the lady on the left of the image, Frances, the Countess of Hertford, lady of the bedchamber to Queen Caroline, so she's conveniently located to Windsor. And Frances writes that she loved the situation. There is something in the retiredness and the beautiful prospect from it. And there's actually a whole mid-18th century poem written about St Leonard's Hill, extolling the virtues of this wonderful place. By the late 1770s, it is bought by the Duke of Gloucester, who also buys the neighbouring property. So there is some confusion in the records about St Leonard's Hill, St Leonard's Mansion. There are two large houses by the 18th century on the site, but the Duke is renaming the hermitage Sophia Farm or Lodge. It's then purchased again by a gentleman called George Bush in the late 18th century, and by 1850, both Gloucester Lodge, so the Duke of Gloucester's accommodation, and Sophia Lodge were purchased by Sir Theodore Brinkman, who changed the name of Sophia Lodge to St Leonard's. So all of this is by way of sort of trying to set the context of that period of 18th century discovery and the subsequent developments at the site. So by the mid-18th century, we have a landscape that looks something like this. Large houses on the sort of hilltop, surrounded by woodland, and the square at the bottom there is the hermitage site. So this is the location, the rebuilt location of Robert Butler's residence. So if he is digging in the garden and finding this material, he is presumably finding it somewhere in this area. So, of course, the next question for any archaeologist is, well, what's there now? Could you go back and have a look? The mansion at the Hermitage was subsequently rebuilt again in the late 19th century and is quite a grand house, visited during the 20th century by people like John F. Kennedy, hosting some quite grand parties, and it's that later mansion which still survives today. So that is what St Leonard's Mansion, as it is now known, looks like today. However, it sits within a wider landscape, shall we say, of leisure. So during the latter part of the 20th century, this site was Windsor Safari Park, and it is now Legoland. So the opportunities, sadly, for future archaeological investigation potentially limited, although if anyone fancies a field trip to Legoland to see just how much landscape modification has taken place, it could be very, very interesting. So to summarise, we have, I believe, an artefact that can be explicitly identified as a Jewish artefact, most likely for domestic and household use, as part of regular weekly activities, but also playing a key part in specific festival celebrations. I do believe that it is likely to be of 13th century rather than 14th century date. The association of St Leonard's Hill with a hermitage and with a religious site is particularly interesting, given the very good condition of this lamp. Now, it's impossible to know exactly what conservation treatments it has been put to over the last 400 years, but certainly the 18th century illustrations would suggest that it has been found in relatively good condition. So I do wonder whether, with that kind of ecclesiastical hermitage context, whether this Jewish item was possibly retained as a curated item in a Christian context. You've heard my thoughts on the possibility of the base being added potentially somewhat earlier than the 18th century, and perhaps it was discarded at the dissolution, so discarded in the early 16th century to be found in the early 18th century. There is a lot that we will potentially never know about this artefact, but hopefully this has been an interesting exploration of an evening. So I'm ending rather as I began last year for my last lecture, which is just to show a picture of the Illuminating Knowledge artwork in its context in the library, to thank you all for your attention, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you. And then, because I've finished amazingly well in time, there is some time for questions if anyone has any questions, or we can go and have a nice drink. Yes, Isabel. Oh, microphone. Sorry, I'm coming.
The V&A chafing dish, which does look very like it, doesn't it? But how did there was no scale in that photograph? So how big is a chafing dish?
Good question, and I don't know the answer. I've seen a chafing dish in ceramic form though, and it's this sort of diameter. So the one on the Society of Antiquaries lamp is a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. So I don't know whether the chafing dish theory holds up at all, given the lack of scale. But yeah, the one I've seen from an archaeological context in ceramics was not. It's probably slightly larger, but not a huge amount larger.
But the V&A could tell you how big that thing is, presumably, and the one they've got. I mean, is that really a chafing dish? That's.
I've stumbled across that picture and thought, God, that looks like the base, so I kind of slung it in. I did try looking it up on the V&A website to see if I could find any more information, and particularly a picture with a scale, but I couldn't track it through their online catalogue, even though it had a reference catalogue number.
But it sounds like a line of questioning, doesn't it?
Yeah, it would be really, really interesting to know, and just to see what it looks like.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, we've got a couple more. We'll come to you in a sec, Michael.
I was terribly impressed by the lecture. It was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Mark.
But what I wonder is, what is the future? What is your future with the material? It should surely be published, and perhaps in the Antiquaries Journal rather than the RAI.
Stuart's giving me the thumbs up from the back. Thank you, editor of the Antiquaries Journal. Yes, I would really like to publish. I do feel I am slightly maybe beyond my field, but I think it would be really interesting to put it out there and see what other lines of inquiry, particularly around the archaeometallurgy, which I think would be really interesting, other people might like to follow. So yes, maybe we should talk, Stu. Michael had a question.
Two questions. One is there a place in modern Jewish religious practice for lamps like this? And the other is, I was puzzled by the drip chamber. It seems frightfully small. I don't know what it catches and how.
So it's presumably catching any kind of runoff oil. The other interesting thing actually that has been noted by other commentators is that there does seem to be a flaw in the design of these lamps as well. So quite often they are broken on one of the sort of spines running up. They are so distinctive in their sort of decoration and manufacture that I do wonder, if we could identify a workshop or the archaeometallurgical sort of context of these, we might learn a lot more. In terms of sort of modern Jewish practice, certainly still lighting candles on the Sabbath is still practiced. You can still, if you look on the internet, you can still buy a star-shaped lamp should you wish to. So, yeah.
So it may be a silly question, but exactly how did the glass bowl-shaped lamps work? I mean, presumably you fill them up with oil, then
And light them and run away. Again,
don't have wicks hanging over the
I don't know the answer to that question. It does seem like a real balancing act between how much oil you could put in and how you would light it before it got too hot and kind of exploded. But perhaps a question for a specialist in I don't know if anyone knows anything about glass lighting, but glass will take a lot of heat, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. Maybe I'll experiment at home.
Be careful.
Size. Obviously, the representation in the medieval documents is artistic license. They might be making it look important. How big were the photographic images you showed us? Were they small like this one or bigger?
As far as I'm aware, I mean, there's an issue here with people including scales in their photographs because almost none of these items have a scale in them in any of the photos that I've seen. Including the Society of Antiquaries lamp. So I was quite surprised at how small it was tonight. It's the first time I've actually seen it in person. So again, there is a piece of research to do, travelling to different sites across Europe to measure all of these lamps. Richmond's paper and possibly Piggott's paper in the 1950s do include some dimensions. I think they are all much of the same size where we know the size. So. Yeah, they are domestic in context.
I was interested in the assemblage.
Yeah.
And the fact that you drew out the idea that this lamp was a curated item. And because the assemblage is really quite eclectic, isn't it? The other items there, the Roman coins, the bronze axes, do you think that how this assemblage came to become a whole, the idea that these were realized as kind of ancient objects and they were collected together, but why did they enter the ground as that collection?
That is one of the biggest questions, I think, about the context of the discovery for the lamp, because it is not a typical hoard, is it? It's really varying date ranges. it's a whole variety of different objects. There's no. It sounds like he was digging in his garden and just kept finding stuff as well, because he continues to bring items for at least another, if he's finding the lamp in 1705, but he's still displaying things that he's finding 20 years later. I don't know whether Robert Butler is receiving antiquities from somewhere else and saying, oh, I found these in the garden and, I've dug them up. And it is unfortunate that we don't know, as far as I know, the location of any other of the items in that hoard. I think it's only the lamp that was presented to the Society of Antiquaries as a piece. I don't think any of the other items from that hoard are, I don't know if you know, Stu, but I don't know if there are any others surviving items, so that you could get an idea of, are they really worn and battered? Are they deposited as a whole? I mean, found under a stone it is an interesting description, but it may well be a question that we can't ever answer. I did have a look to see whether in all of the sort of developments for Legoland, whether there had been any archaeological evaluation and whether they'd found anything, of any period. The most recent one was an evaluation for the construction of a hotel on site, and it was pretty negative evaluation, so there was no further archaeological evidence coming to light. I don't know when Legoland was originally developed, and when Windsor Safari Park went out of use, and what landscape modifications might have happened for Windsor Safari Park, presumably a lot of ditches and fences. It is a shame. It seems like a real missed opportunity to know more about that site and to understand more about the context in which Robert Butler could possibly have been finding all of those different things under one stone. So, are there any other questions? That might be it. Thank you, Sue. Well, if everyone is happy and there are no further questions, we shall draw this part of the evening to a close. Thank you all for coming. And I believe we're inviting everyone to join us for a drink. Is that correct, Sharon? Oh, before we do that, I must just point you to our table of merchandise, because we're all about the merch. We have some lovely new pin badges for you. They have just arrived. They are so shiny. They're so pretty. Please do go and have a look. Sharon is holding one up. And Rachel is modelling one if you'd like to see what it looks like on your person. So thank you all very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you for a drink. Thank you. I suddenly realised I wasn't going to be able to do that.